affordable grocery store project that would help people in Wilmington is now being discussed among the community. WECT's Anaya Cromartie attended a meeting and shares what plans are to move forward with the business after it got put on pause.
An affordable grocery store that's supposed to be built on the north side of Wilmington has come to a halt as project developers raise concerns about how they could sustain their business. The Northside community says they could use more affordable grocery stores. That's why Northside Food Co-op planned to bring them that option. But after hearing the city sold a plot of land near their business site that would bring a bigger grocery store to the area, developers of the affordable grocery store are reconsidering.
Obviously, having another grocery store in town affects us, and so it's our responsibility as the co-op, based on the trust that we've built with the community, to make sure that we build something that's sustainable.
At a community meeting, organizers discussed how they could bring more foot traffic to their store.
In terms of potential foot traffic, and ultimately, if you don't have those things, your store won't survive.
Organizers would like to consider moving to a different location, but keeping it in the north side. They're also thinking about adding a hot food counter inside the store that would be affordable and would allow for community opportunities.
I think it'll highlight our local culinary scene, which is pretty amazing, and it'll allow us to create more jobs.
The executive director says putting a pause on building will help them to receive community input on how to move forward. And those funding the project are allowing for the time to do that. We'll meet with county leaders and New Hanover County Endowment at the end of the month to submit a final recommendation. Anaya Cromartie, WECT News.